here.
No.
We'll prop something up.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop wittering, and I'd like you all to welcome Jeff Godell.
Hey, thanks so much. I'll take one of those. Thanks. Hey, how are you? I got to get this thing situated. Pardon me. It's been 4 years, actually, I think, since I was last in Sydney. So it's really good to be back. Unfortunately, my visit here is too short. I was in New Zealand last week at Webstock. In fact, this is the talk I gave at Webstock. So if you missed Webstock, you get to see this again, which is a really fascinating and interesting event. There was kind of a bit of a drama there at the end. If you've read the design blogs, that was less cool, but. Anyway, for those of you who have spent one of the last 2 days in a workshop with me, and I've seen a few familiar faces in the room, you still have to laugh at all my jokes. It's really important. Some of the jokes may be the same as I told the other day or earlier today. So look, the interesting thing about the work that we've done since Lean UX has been that it's generated a tremendous amount of feedback. And that feedback said, this is great. You know, all the literature kind of points to how to do lean or agile or design thinking at the team level. But when you start to scale this out to 5 teams or 10 teams or 50 teams or 100 teams, this stuff starts to break. And the conversation then becomes, how do you scale these ideas of collaboration, user centricity, agility, and so forth into larger organizations? And so that's kind of what I want to cover today and talk about the various things that I believe can help scale these conversations. But to get that conversation started, I actually need to shift gears pretty significantly and talk to you about my favorite movie. Which seems weird, like a weird kind of segue, but here it is. This is my favorite movie. My favorite movie is Goodfellas. How many of you have seen Goodfellas? Okay, for those of you who have, we should just pause for 3 hours, watch it, and then come back because it's that good. But I really do know it. And in fact, this is my favorite scene in the entire movie. Now, if you're familiar with the movie, what's happening in this scene is you've got Robert De Niro, Ray Liotta, and Joe Pesci. They were out solving a problem that had occurred earlier that evening, and they needed to get a knife to solve that problem that was currently in Ray Liotta's trunk in the boot of his car there. And so they stopped by Joe Pesci's mom's house to get that knife to solve that problem, and she was awake. It was late at night. They were surprised that she was awake, and she invites them to come in. Of course, Italian family, come sit down, have something to eat with us. They can't say no, so they sit down to eat in the middle of the night with Joe Pesci's mom. And during the conversation over the meal here, she talks to them about this particular painting here that she did, that she takes credit for, and they look at the painting. They're all kind of oohing and eyeing and over it. And then as soon as it gets to Pesci, he utters what I think is one of the greatest lines in the entire movie. Check it out. Ready? Oh, where's my ball?
Look at this.
That's beautiful.
I like this one. One dog goes one way and the other dog goes the other way.
Well, that's gone east and the other one has gone west, so what?
And this guy's saying, what do you want from me?
I love that scene. It's just, I could watch that 1,000 times. It's so good, right? Now, the interesting thing is that I was talking to a client of mine last year, a client that I've been working with for the last year, and he's in charge of essentially training up his folks. And he found himself in a similar situation, kind of assessing, as Pesci assessing this particular training. He said, look, I'm trying to get my teams aligned and scale and trained up. And on the one hand, I've got my tech teams, and I'm training them up in Agile. And then over here, I've got my product teams, and they're learning Lean. And then I got this third dog going the other way, and that's the design dog, and they're learning design thinking. And I've got myself in the middle saying, which one is right? Like, what do you want from me? I'm training everybody up the same way, and everybody's learning things that seem to be the right things for them to be learning, lean and agile and design thinking, and yet bringing them together in some kind of a collaborative way that gets everybody working on the same cadences, with the same vocabulary, and with the same goals has proven to be extremely problematic. What are we doing wrong? Right? How do we bring these things together, particularly in a large company? Right? We're training people in these different situations. And I find this to be the case in a lot of large organizations where the silos dictate the kind of training that you get, and then bringing the teams together to figure out how all these things play nice together has proven to be extremely problematic. Even at one team, forget about 10 or 50 or 100 teams. And so then how do you bring these things together? Now the fascinating thing here is that this seems to be an enterprise level problem. In the startup world, this problem doesn't seem to exist, right? And by the way, if you know where this startup is, this is where I want to work forever, in this conference room. But seriously, startups don't have this problem. They don't have this problem because they've got a finite number of people. They know what their choices are, and they know the consequences are for their choices. They know who they have to do the work. They don't have a variety of people to choose from, and they know who they don't have to do the work. They know what they don't know. They know how much runway they have, and most importantly, they know the consequences of making the wrong decisions. They don't have time to debate, how are we training this person, how are we training that person. Everybody's got to figure out how to work together quickly. The challenges start to arise in the enterprise. Right? With the benefit of scale and with the benefit of increased funding and headcount comes great responsibility. All of a sudden things change, right? You've got access to larger teams, you've got access to more disciplines, you've got access to specialists, whereas before everybody was kind of sharing in the workload. You seemingly have endless runway, and if you make the wrong decisions, I mean, maybe you might get fired, but in reality, probably nothing will happen. And so the organizations continue to assume that they know everything, and they keep spinning without this real burning desire to really figure out what we should be working on or how we should be working together as a team. We just keep kind of spinning in these all directions. And yet, with this being the reality, everywhere that I go, and I work with large companies primarily, every large company says they want to be like a startup. It's like these talking heads in the background. We want to be lean. We want to be agile. We want to be like a startup, right? This is the language set that's being used across the organization, right? How many of you work in an agile environment, or at least pretend? Right? It's like 60, it's 2/3 of the room, right? And everybody says they want to be like a startup. And the interesting thing is that, again, all the literature, all the principles of lean startup and agile and lean UX, they seem to work really well at the single team level. But when you take them, when you stretch them to bigger organizations, right, they seem to break. Right? How do we actually take all of these components, these different trainings and these different concepts, and build them into a framework that actually works? Right? Why does this happen? Right? Why does lean and agile seem to break at scale? Well, I set out to solve this problem. And so I decided to do a little bit of scientific research, and by research I mean I asked Twitter. Why does lean seem to break its scale? And I got a ton of really great responses from the various people who replied to my request about why lean seems to break its scale, right? And these should seem pretty familiar, I would guess. I mean, these seem to be familiar to me. Things like, it says, like, we already know what we need to do. Why do we need to waste time learning? Right? It's a waste of time. Just ship it. Good enough doesn't get respected as a viable option to ship it. I like this one. Process. Everything has a process, and 85 approvals from a mysterious they. Right? They have to sign off on everything before we can get it done. This is a good one. Business cases up front, or you can't, to commit to deadlines and targets and fixed scope, which we know is a lie. Silos. Valuing business need over user need and not realizing they're the same thing, and concerns about our brand, right? We can't experiment on our brands. We have an MVP. These are very common problems. These are familiar problems, and these are part of the main reasons that these concepts of lean and agility and continuous learning and continuous improvement and product discovery seem to break at scale. And so the question then becomes, how do we move these big organizations past these hurdles? How do we get them past this? Because clearly there's got to be a way And the concepts are proven at the single team level. How do we prove these out at the 50 and the 100-person team level? Well, there's a couple ways to think about this. One way to think about this is this concept of project, program, and portfolio. And what's interesting is that at each one of these different levels, the questions that we're trying to answer as we scale up these kinds of practices and this way of working change. So for example, at the project level, the question that we're trying to answer at the single team or the project level is, how do we incorporate more learning into each initiative, right? If you've got teams focused or incentivized simply to ship software, how do we incorporate more learning into that process? When you scale that out to multiple projects, to the program level, the conversation gets a bit dicier, right? How do we coordinate multiple discovery and delivery efforts focused on the same goals, right? If you've got 4 or 5 teams spinning against the same challenge, how do we make sure that they're maximizing their work, they're not stepping on each other's toes, they're not duplicating effort? When you scale this out to the entire company, you're looking at it at the portfolio level, and the question really becomes even more challenging, which is, how do we coordinate multiple programs? How do we enforce governance? And how do we meet shareholder expectations, right? We can't just start to spin on things in the hopes that the company continues to exist for another month or a quarter or 2 quarters. Now, what's fascinating is that to answer these questions, there's a variety of challenges that keep us from getting to the right answers at each one of these levels. And I want to kind of address each one of those first. So at the project level, specifically what we're looking at is things like teams optimizing for throughput. In other words, optimizing for delivery, right? The incentive structure is get stuff out the door quickly and then move on to the next thing. Parallel path discovery and delivery, like doing learning and discovery and design work at the same time as delivery is challenging. Teams generally don't have any autonomy to make any decisions. The mindset, because they're incentivized for delivery, the mindset is incremental, not iterative. So just make stuff and more stuff and more stuff, as opposed to making something and then making it better and then making it better and making it better. And then, of course, the perceived risk to brand and current customers that keeps organizations restricts teams from actually doing any kind of real experimentation. Now, what's fascinating is that at the program level, the problems get even hairier, right? So we've got multiple teams. How do we coordinate them? How do we make sure that they communicate well and capture each other's knowledge? Generally, they've got to start interfacing with legacy systems, and building kind of rapid experimentations on old systems is difficult. We tend to, as programs grow, we tend to start to run out of people, and so we begin to offshore, which breaks the cycle of learning, of collaboration, and of shared understanding. Or we work with distributed teams who, if they're in different time zones and are not awake at the same time as we are, essentially cause the same types of issues as offshoring. Now, at the portfolio level, it gets even more interesting, right? It's like as we start to scale this stuff out, the issues get thornier and thornier and thornier. We've got silos, both discipline-specific silos, right? So we've got IT over here and marketing over there. Got business silos, right? So this business unit doesn't talk or share with that business unit. You've got this is really fascinating, right? IT is a service provider. This is a problem because if you're a business of scale or a business that seeks to scale in the 21st century, you're in the software business first. That's the only way to scale in the 21st century. IT can't be, the guys who make the website sit over there, right? IT's got to be integrated into the entire way that the organization works. And if your organization sees them as simply a cost center, right, this whole digital transformation and continuous learning thing can't happen at scale. Organizations at the portfolio level still value the business, short-term business wins over customer wins. The annual planning cycle, attempting to predict the future. I'll give you $1 million to solve a problem in 2018. What's going to happen in 2018? I don't know, but you've got to guess and hope that you're right. Incentive structures that, again, drive sort of delivery as opposed to learning, governance and stuff. And the most interesting one, I think, in this list is this last one, Conway's Law, but in reverse. So you find Conway's Law is that law that says that you build systems that reflect your organizational structure. And so you've got companies that have done that, right? They've got an org structure and they've built a system on top of that org structure that reflects the way the company works. Now they want to change their org structure and the systems don't support it. And so it's this weird sort of cycle where what do we change first, the culture or the systems that support it, and they don't know what to do. It becomes a really big challenge at the organizational level. And so then how do you fix all this stuff, right? I've just laid out a ton of problems. How do you fix it? Well, it turns out that there's no shortage of recipes. right? Lots of ways that people are proposing to solve for this. And I think one of the most terrifying examples of the myriad of options available for people is this particular diagram, right? Now look, I think this was created by an Australian. I'm not joking. But look, the issue with this diagram is not that this diagram exists or that it was created, right? The issue with this diagram is that this is true, right? This is the landscape of options that organizations have to pick from when it comes to how do we do modern tech-driven work. If we want to leverage technology to scale, where do we start on this, right? First time I saw this, this is how I felt about the whole thing. You know, just trying to understand, kind of, just didn't know what to do with it, right? That was essentially my reaction the whole time with this thing, right? And perhaps the most popular one of all of those things on that eye chart that I showed you is this one. How many of you have seen this diagram before? We've got a few folks in the room. Not a lot. For those of you, I'm kind of happy that not a lot of you have seen this. For those of you who haven't seen this, this is SAFe. This is the Scaled Agile Framework. And I think by far, this is the most popular framework for scaling Agile these days. And I already did my reveal, unfortunately. Managers love this because they can see themselves in the picture. So the reality is they love this is because they don't have to change, right? This particular approach says everybody down in the trenches that's doing the work, they have to change everything in the way that they work. But as a manager, I can still kind of make these waterfall-style demands on top of you, and that's where this thing starts to break. Now look, I like to pick on this. I like to pick on most of these ideas, but the reality is this. They are frameworks. They are not destinations, they are starting points. So if you use SAFe, fine, use SAFe, but it is not your destination. Don't follow that recipe and then think that you're done. That's when you've started figuring out how to scale these particular ways of working. And then once you start to apply the realities of your organization, your domain, your corporate politics, your regulations, your, the environment that you work in, your customers, etc., you need to adjust these frameworks so that they work for you. The only way to do that is to really get a sense of what are the principles or the values that you care about as an organization. The only way to scale this style of working, this collaborative, user-centric, agile style of working, is to scale principles, not the processes, right? The process delivers this kind of seductive near-term outcomes, as Netflix said in their legendary culture deck that came out almost 8 years ago now, which is crazy. We want to think about principles, the principles that we want to live every day at work. And if you can scale those principles out, if you can maintain them at a team, at 5 teams, at 50 teams, then the agility, the continuous improvement, the design-centered culture continues to thrive regardless of your domain and regardless of the size of your organization. To do that, to help you do that, I want to give you 4 principles to think about scaling as you start to scale. What are these? I think these are 4 of the core principles that if you applied them to the way that you work in your organization, you will start to see the benefits of agility at scale, of continuous learning and improvement. I'm going to give you some tactics for making sure that these principles stay front and center in your conversation at work. Okay? Here's the first one. The first one is this. Customer value and business value are the same thing. That's it. Super simple. If you make your customers successful, if you build products that make them successful, that respect their time, that are a delight to use, that solve real problems for them in a meaningful way, they will reward you. They will buy your stuff. They will buy it again. They will tell their friends, right? They'll tell their boss. They'll recommend you to others. They will reward you. The more that you can figure out the problems that your customers are having, and the better that you can solve them, the more successful your business will be. Right? Seems simple enough. I think I'm preaching to the choir to the folks in this room, would be my guess. Right? How do you keep that conversation front and center at all levels of the organization, at the project level, at the program level, at the portfolio level? One of the best tactics for doing that is this concept of OKRs. How many of you have heard of OKRs before? Let's say about maybe a quarter of the room. Good. OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results. I'm going to give you about the 60-second crash course in OKRs, but if you're interested in this topic further, get Christina Whitkey's book. It's called Radical Focus. It's about 100 pages, and she does a remarkable job of really knocking out what an OKR is, how to use it. Because this came out of Google, out of LinkedIn, out of Zynga, General Assembly, et cetera. And Christina worked at half those companies. So she knows this kind of stuff. Here's how this stuff works and why it keeps the customer front and center in all conversations. Objectives and key results. The objective is our goal. What do we care about as a company? It's a qualitative assessment of what we'd like to achieve as an organization. It's inspirational. It's time-bound. We want to achieve this by a particular date. And most importantly, it's actionable by the team independently. This is particularly important in the enterprise. If you give a team an OKR, they should be able to hit that on their own with minimal dependencies on outside teams. Now, the KR piece is the how will we know piece. So if the objective is the qualitative piece, we want to be the best, the best bank in Australia by the end of Q2. How will we know that we're the best bank in Australia by the end of Q2, right? Well, we want to measure it. We want to set a goal that's difficult but not impossible. That goal should cascade down through the organization. I'll tell you what I mean by that in just a second. It should be rhythmic. We should be exploring, checking in on that goal periodically to make sure that we're actually trending towards hitting it, or if we're not, why not? What I mean by cascading down is that the organization at the portfolio level has an OKR. You take it a step down to the program level, the programs have OKRs that are leading indicators of success for the organizational level OKR. And then the teams have project level OKRs. Right? So all those are the leading indicators that will help us achieve our strategic goals. Now, the interesting thing about these KRs is that they are measures of customer behavior. They keep the customer at the center of the conversation. That was a little ambiguous, so let me show you what I mean by an example that I made up. For example, right, our objective is to be the dominant platform for car dealer inventory management by the end of the year, right? Now, how will we know? Right, so that's a big, qualitative, audacious goal. How will we know? Well, we'll know that 50% of all independent dealers are our users. That's a measure of customer behavior. You can optimize for that. You can check how you're tracking for that. And there's nothing in here, when well written, OKRs don't talk about features. They talk about customer behavior. 6 of the top 10 car makers mandate our platform for their dealerships. Again, different audience, different behavior, measurable, keeps the customer front and center in the conversation. How are we trending on that? 40% of auto auction houses using our inventory API. Again, another conversation about a different kind of customer that helps you understand whether or not you're building something that customers value, right? Because that's a measure of customer behavior. If you're building a crappy API and no one's using it, let's find out why. You're delivering customer value. By delivering customer value, you end up delivering business value and achieving your objectives. OKRs are a terrific way to keep the customer conversation front and center in everything that we do and in the way that we manage and incentivize the work that we're doing as a team. Now, what's really interesting, if you want to get even nerdier about this, is that we can use OKRs to actually reduce the annual planning cycles, right? This kind of wishful thinking about the future, the thought that we could predict the future, right? We can use OKRs to drive quarterly planning, or just shorter cycles. I use quarterly as an example, but shorter cycle planning. Let me show you what I mean by that, okay? You take a team, a cross-functional team, product design and engineering, you give them a goal, an objective to hit, an OKR for a quarter. That team starts to spin around that goal, right? They're shipping products, they're sensing whether or not it experiments products, they're learning whether they're working, they're responding to what they're learning, that kind of build, measure, learn type of thing, right? They work for a quarter. Let's just say just a shorter time period than a year. At the end of that cycle, they come up for refunding, right? Think of it as a startup, kind of an internal startup funding model. That team comes up for refunding, and they say, look, you tasked us with increasing retention by 50%. We've been working for a quarter. We ran some experiments. We shipped some product, and we've increased retention by 22%. Here's what we've learned. If you fund us for another quarter, here's what we'll do. And we expect to hit 35, 40% by the end of Q2. What you've done in this situation is that you have given your stakeholders, the people who fund your project, evidence. with which they can make a better funding decision, a more real-time funding decision about whether this is a project that's still worth investing in. Should we still work on this? Right? They could say, yep, you're doing great work, keep going. Right? Or they may say, you know what? Don't work on that anymore. Let's work on something else. Or the team may come up at the end of that short cycle and say, listen, we hit 50%. We still have 3/4 worth of funding left. What do you want to do? Or the team could come up and say, we're never going to hit 50%. It's never going to happen. Here's why. What do you want to do? But the idea is that we're shortening the time frames for decision making when it comes to deciding what we're working on, and we're using evidence through continuous learning to determine whether or not this is worth further investments. And these OKRs, these measures of customer behavior, tell us whether or not we're doing good work or not. How are we affecting the customer behavior? And that keeps the customer front and center in this particular conversation. So that's just one way, or a couple ways to think through moving, keeping the customer value and business values the same thing front and center. The second principle I want to cover is this: valuing learning over delivery. Most organizations incentivize their teams for shipping product. That's it. But learning which products to spend your time on and to what extent they should be invested in is more valuable. How do we start to get organizations to value learning, product discovery, design, research, as opposed to just, did we get the feature out the door? A couple of tactics for getting this principle ingrained into the way that you work. Okay? First and foremost, pilot teams. Don't try to change an entire organization overnight at once. Find a team. Give them a project. A low-risk one is fine. Give them a finite amount of time. And set their goal as learning, not return on investment, not shipping features. Their velocity will be slower. In fact, the velocity of delivery will probably be a lot slower, but their velocity of learning will be a lot higher. And that's okay. We set them out to achieve a specific OKR, a specific metric that aligns to a strategic initiative, and we let them spin. And the things that they learn, they'll learn A, how to do this work, first of all, and second, how to do it within the context of your company. So where's this hard? Where do we run into legal barriers? Where do we run into finance problems? When do we run into staffing issues? And they'll be able to report back. To make them more successful, we take these pilot teams and we give them sandboxes. What I mean by sandboxes is not just the digital sandboxes, not just safe spaces for them to launch product and to test new ideas, but actual behavioral and governance sandboxes. Let's say you work in a high-end B2B environment, right? You want to spin up a pilot team, but you can't have, you only have 1,000 customers. So you say, look, to the team, you can only talk to one customer once, to each customer once a year, right? That's still better than nothing. Right? Give the team those kind of guardrails that say you can build research and learning and continuous improvement and agility into the way that you work, but here are the guardrails for that. So they know what they can do, and they can start to bump up against that, and they may push back and say, you know what, we need to talk to them twice a year. And then we can see the kind of impact that has. When you create these pilot teams and you give them these kind of sandboxes to work in, you encourage them to experiment creatively. They'll figure out how to solve the problems that they need to solve. This is one of the most creative and interesting experiments I've come across in my exploration of this particular topic. You guys know what's happening here? The bank people know what's happening here, right? This is a contactless payments vendor. And what they need to do is they need to QA a bunch of different payment machines with their contactless card. And so they've got to keep tapping this thing over and over and over and over and over again. Now, they could do that manually, but that's going to get old really fast. So these guys put it on a toy train in a circle on a track, and they just let it run past the devices all day long and count whether the transaction went through or not. Right? This is the kind of creative experimentation that teams come up with when you give them guardrails. Right? They get creative. Creativity thrives within the constraints. Right. So we've got customer value and business value being the same thing. We've got valuing learning over delivery. The third principle I want you to take home with you is this: radical transparency in everything that you do. Transparency breeds trust. The more transparent you can be about your goals, OKRs at the strategic level is an exercise in transparency. What do we care about as a company? right? You're putting the customer first, customer behavior first. The more transparent you can be about what you're doing, what you're learning, where you've won, where you've failed, the more it encourages others in the organization to work this way. Even if they don't understand why they're doing it at first, there's all kinds of ways to drive transparency into the organization. And one of my favorite tactics for driving transparency is rituals, particularly the agile rituals. Daniel's son wanted to learn karate. Can you guess what decade I grew up in, by the way? Daniel's son wanted to learn karate. So he went to see Mr. Miyagi, and Miyagi-san said, you want to learn karate? Terrific, paint the fence. And Danielson says, I want to learn karate. He said, great. He goes, wax my car. Right? Danielson doesn't understand why he's got to paint the fence or wax the car until kind of, towards the end of the movie, and he's like, oh crap, I'm learning karate. Right? The same thing is true of some of these rituals. Now, I'm not an advocate for all the rituals, but some of the agile rituals like stand-ups, scrum of scrums, demo days, retrospectives, those types of things, people don't know initially why they're doing them, but they're exercises in transparency. This is what I worked on yesterday. This is what I'm working on today. What's going well? What's not going well? What should we fix? They encourage people to share what's broken, to encourage where they're struggling, to share where they're struggling, and encourages them to get better. It helps teams to learn from each other by seeing what others have done, and then to use those learnings in their particular projects, and it reduces duplicate efforts. And it's those rituals that drive transparency, even if the teams don't get why they got to do stand-up every day, or why they have to do a retrospective at the end of every 2 weeks. Right? Those rituals help drive that transparency. Another tactic to help drive transparency is access to customers. I know this sounds basic for a room full of UX people and designers, right? But it's so critical to give your teams access to customers, because no first idea ever, survives contact with the customer, right? If you've ever seen Jared Spool speak, he calls this immersive exposure. How do we get our executives, our teams, exposed to customers on a regular basis? Right? This drives transparency because it ensures that market feedback is clear and widely broadcast. Right? The whole company needs to know how our ideas are faring when customers interact with them. As my friend David Bland likes to say, especially when it comes to MVPs, is that the second hardest thing about MVPs is that while you decide what's minimum, it's the customer that determines if it's viable. Right? The sooner you can get customer feedback, the faster you can determine whether or not you're working on the right thing, and that drives transparency. Why did we change this way of working? Because the customers reacted poorly to this. There's a great case study in our new book, Sense and Respond, from a company in Germany called Maxdome, about how they're using customer access to drive transparency. Maxdome is essentially the German language Netflix. That's it. That's what they do. Right? They're Netflix for German-speaking countries. Okay. They're a subsidiary of a bigger media company, but when they set up the company, Amazon and Netflix hadn't yet come to Germany. Amazon and Netflix are now set up in Germany, Amazon Prime and Netflix. In addition to that challenge, the German kind of national culture is skeptical of subscription models. It's just not something that they do. Right? So you've got a company that's setting up to compete against Netflix, Amazon, and trying to take on a national cultural belief that subscription models are sketchy. Right? It's a pretty tough call. Right? Marvin Lang, who's the CEO of Maxdome, decided that the only way that they're going to succeed is by driving customer access throughout the organization. So his designers and his product managers, they get this, right? They sit in call centers. There's an unlimited research budget. But the most interesting thing that he does to drive the transparency in the organization of how well the product is faring is he makes his direct reports sell the product face-to-face, hand-to-hand in the Christmas markets throughout Germany every year. He makes them go out on the street and do literally face-to-face street intercept sales of this product so that they can see firsthand what the reaction is, what the pushback is, what the learning is. And that drives that transparency throughout the organization about why we're making certain decisions, where the value is for our audience, and how we're going to beat the competition. Complementary to access to customers to drive transparency is access to data. It still amazes me that in companies driven by technology, getting access to analytics is still a pain in the ass in an overwhelming number of cases. Access to data, access to analytics should be treated like a utility. It's like the water fountain or the coffee machine or snacks, right? Or Hawaiian shirt Fridays or whatever it is that you do, right? Everybody should have access to this, to data. It shouldn't be something that people struggle to get, because we need to know now how we're doing. What are customers doing with our product, why they're doing it, and to drive that home. Right? I used to work in a company where you got a certain number of hours every month for the BI queue. Right? And if you used up your hours, you couldn't get any more analytics data that month. That was it. Like, do your best with what you had. And if the CEO needed data, he could always jump the queue and then knock you out until next month. Right? That's unacceptable in companies that seek to scale and to drive a culture of continuous learning. We have to know what's happening with our product. And the level of accountability you can get with technology is 100%. So let's get that out there. So, 3 principles so far we've covered. Customer value equals business value, value learning over delivery, and radical transparency. The last principle that will help you scale agility at any size of the organization, will help you scale lean thinking and continuous improvement, is humility. Humility in all things. I think this is the most humble person I could come up with, at least in pop culture. Just because we've always done things one way doesn't mean we should continue doing it that way. We should be open to new ideas. Right? There's the saying in the Agile circles, if you talk to the Agile religion people, they talk about beginner's mind. Right? I like the phrase strong opinions loosely held better. That we come at this with a strong opinion of how things should be, but in the face of evidence, we are humble enough to change our mind. And we prove that it's okay to be wrong. How do we drive humility as a value throughout the organization? We got the customer up front, right? But how do we drive humility in that? Well, one tactic for that is product discovery. It's the stuff that we talk about in the Lean UX book, right? How do we determine what we should work on? We ask ourselves a question, right? As we set out on a new initiative, what's the most important thing that we need to learn first about this thing? In other words, what's the riskiest thing that's baked into this project? And then what's the least amount of work that we need to do to learn that thing? And then let's learn that before we invest for the next 9 or 12 months to build something. One of my favorite recent examples that I discovered was the Amazon Echo. When they set out to build this particular product, at the time, the riskiest thing about this project for them was, what are people going to ask this thing? And perhaps more importantly, what's a good answer? And so before they spent 18 months writing artificial intelligence code to decipher that, they decided to run an experiment. The most important thing they had to learn was, what are people going to ask this thing? So they put a customer in a room with an empty box, with a cylinder. And they had the customer ask the box questions. Now in the room next door was an engineer. That engineer heard the question and typed in Google queries and then fed the answers back to the customer in the other room. Right? Because the most important thing that they needed to learn to drive that humility in this case was, what are people going to ask this thing and what works? Right? That's humble, right? Instead of assuming that we know exactly how to write this code and what people will ask this thing, let's make sure that we find out and do invest, the least amount of work that we can do to find that out so that we can build the right product. Right? So we design something that actually solves real customer problems, or at the very least plays the music that I ask it to on a consistent basis. Another tactic to drive humility in your organization at the portfolio level is what I call the orbital model. Right? If you're trying to be agile and lean with your product and tech team, it's not going to work at scale without legal, HR, finance, sales, marketing working with you, right? But you can't have all those people on your team and still hope to get anything done, like full-time, right? Full-time on your team, and then hope to get anything done. And so instead, we think about them as being in orbit of the core team. So you've got this core team of product design and engineering, right? These other disciplines orbit around these teams. They provide support at varying levels, but on a consistent basis. So for example, you have access to a lawyer for 4 hours every month, right? An hour a week type of thing. The people from brand get to see your thing once every 2 weeks. Right? The idea here is that you're always getting feedback from the rest of the organization at a pace that matches the pace that you're actually learning. so that you can adjust course in a compliant way, in a brand-centric way, in a way that sets the expectations for finance about what you'll actually be delivering. And this makes the learning that you're doing more valid and more likely to see the light of day when you're actually ready to ship the product to a broad audience. Right? Start to engage with our supporting disciplines in a different way. Another thing to think through when it comes to humility, its scale, when it comes to agile and lean, is your staffing model. Many organizations at scale are dragging certain roles and job titles into the 21st century simply because they've always been there. And as we start to build these self-sufficient, self-organizing, hopefully empowered and autonomous teams, we should be asking ourselves whether or not those roles are still necessary. And if they're not, how do we take those folks and put them in positions that add more value? I'm going to throw out some job titles that are going to make me unpopular with some people in the room, I'm guessing. Okay? But I'm not saying these jobs don't need to exist. I'm just saying consider it. Right? Take a humble point of view as to how you're working and think about, do you need project managers? Do you need business analysts? Maybe. Do you need scrum masters? Right? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Something to think through, though. Are we simply carrying those positions through because we've always had them, or because they actually add value? And if they don't add value in this modern, approach to product development, then how do we get those folks into a position that does add value? Right? To support that, you've got to modernize your tech stack as well. You've got to take a look, are we building on a platform that allows us to scale learning, to scale conversation with the customer, to scale continuity? And of course, the thing that I'm referring to is DevOps. Right? Are you building a culture of DevOps? DevOps empowers agility at scale. It empowers continuous learning because it allows you to make shipping software a non-event. Right? When shipping product is a non-event, then we can just get ideas out there as quickly as we have them ready, learn from them, and then respond or roll them back. But the idea is to make sure that we've got the capability and the culture that supports this way of working. Right? Does your tech stack support continuous learning? That's humility at the portfolio level. One of my favorite slides is for my friend Bill Scott over at PayPal, and he said, look, particularly for you folks who do SAFe, right? The old way of thinking is that kind of the release train departs infrequently, once a month, once every 6 weeks, once every couple of months. Instead, when you employ this continuous deployment platform, like from DevOps, right, you got sort of this light rail model where, hey, you know what, you missed the deployment? That's okay, there's another one in 8 minutes, in 10 minutes, and so forth. And then lastly, the way that we leverage our technology platform to support continuous learning at scale is that we enable prototyping in the engineering stack, so that prototyping becomes a first-class citizen of the stack, which allows us to move, when we actually validate our prototypes, move very quickly from prototype to production. And if you're looking for more detail, I stole those last 2 slides from Bill Scott. All his stuff is on SlideShare, and you should definitely look it up because he's really, really smart and he gets this. Right? But that's humility at the portfolio level. Look, to wrap this up and put a fine point on it, if you're a manager in the room, this is on you. Right? This is a top-down effort. Your teams, the people who work on these teams, already want to work this way. That's the feedback that I've gotten from 4 years of having lean UX in the field. Right? The feedback overwhelmingly from practitioners is, yes, we want to work this way. My boss won't let me work this way, or my company doesn't work this way. So if we can scale these values, we can start to think through how to create the environment that allows teams to work this way. If you're not a manager in this room, your responsibility is to find that person. Find the shit umbrella. And what I mean by that is find that executive who already is bought into this. The person who will carve out a safe space for you and a pilot team to try this stuff out. The person who will stick their neck out and protect you from all the organizational crap that typically kills these efforts once they get started. Who is that person? Find them and ask them to sponsor an initiative for you and see if they'll put that together. And when you pitch them on that idea, pitch them on these principles. This is the way we want to work. Forget the buzzwords, right? We want to drive customer value at the same level as business value. We want to value learning over delivery. We want to be radically transparent in everything that we do, and we want to have humility in all things. Thank you very much.
You got some time for some questions.
I do.
Got some time for some questions.
We have a giveaway too, don't we?
I believe
We do. Excellent.
in this awesome
Nice.
little, classic.
That's how I send all books, in the classy
I
packaging.
was thinking of wrapping them, but yeah. Who has a question? Can I see some hands? I'm going to try and fit you all in. Don't be shy. I'm sure there's some questions here. Is there anyone who's like, running? Oh, sorry, there we go. We've got somebody here. I'm just going to do my running around thing.
Okay.
I can't cut through here. Okay. Chairs in here.
Hi there.
Hey.
So Sean, a user researcher at a fintech company in Sydney. You talked about access to data.
Yeah.
Obviously, so important, both qualitative and quantitative. Curious if you've seen great examples of bigger companies or even mid-sized companies that are making it easy for everyone to get access to qualitative data. You find that to be a lot messier and harder to actually collect, synthesize, and share widely. So your thoughts on that?
I mean, look, it's happening all over the world. I mean, companies are making this happen. I think that generally it's with homegrown systems. Some companies will buy some kind of some packaged systems, like I guess Adobe Omniture and but realistically, the flexibility, I used to work in that industry years ago, the flexibility of some of those systems may not give you the data that you need. So oftentimes you're seeing teams create this homegrown systems and make them accessible. Teams that I've worked on that have not had access to these systems have hacked their way in. In other words, we've leveraged our engineers to get us the data that we need, or we've managed to find an analyst who can write SQL queries, or whatever it is, to get us the data that we need. And so one way or the other, if your company, I've seen, so yes, there's companies like, lots and lots of, like Shutterstock in New York, for example, the stock photography company provides access to everybody, but these are internal systems that aren't obviously public. But if you're not getting access to that, see if you can leverage the engineers on your team to help you get, that information exists, right? You just typically have to go through some kind of a gatekeeper to get it, whether it's the BI manager or something along those lines, right? And so generally your engineers will probably have access to those same systems, and I've leveraged them to be like, can we go get this data, right? I mean, we're not looking for anything massive or hugely complicated, and generally they've been able to generate that. And once they get, the interesting part for me has been over the years, what I've seen is once you get engineers to do that and they kind of see the value in it, they kind of get a sense of the excitement that drives in the team. They can see the direct impact that the work that we're doing yesterday had on customers tomorrow, that type of thing. They start doing it on their own. You stop asking. You just kind of show up when the data's there, and it kind of magically appears. So I've seen it happen both those ways. How does one get a book? Yeah, so really quick, I've got, we haven't figured this out. I'm not going to throw them out and ping somebody in the head with them. We've got,
No, because the person who stands up with the first question gets a book.
oh, well, he stood up with the first question. Well, all right.
Some of yours to
Okay, so that gentleman gets a book. All right. Can you pass that back, please? Thanks. So I've only got, right, questions through there. So Jake already has a book, so he doesn't count. Yeah.
Question: what is the most interesting, or maybe a better word is creative, experiment you've ever
Wow.
seen a team conduct in order to validate or invalidate an idea?
I mean, God, we've done so many interesting things. I'm trying to think back kind of the Neo days. I mean, Neo was the consulting company that we had for 4 years. I mean, we've stood outside hardware stores, kind of wearing sandwich boards and offering services that were ultimately going to be digitized to see if people would pay money for this particular, it was like $1 for some kind of handyman advice. We've done that to see the value of the service. right? Instead of building a software, we just stood in the place where the customers would be in the right context, and it failed, right? That didn't work. Nobody wanted to give us $1 for this particular service that we were offering. I think the most interesting experiment we did, and I don't know that the website is still up. If it isn't, I'll find a way, maybe the Wayback Machine, but askalexis.io is probably the most interesting sort of Wizard of Oz experiment that we ran at NEO, which was we had a little bit of bench time, and so we put 3 people on a project, and they decided that they wanted to build essentially a chatbot that provided advice for men, a text-based chatbot that advice for men. And they Wizard of Oz'd the whole thing from beginning to end, you know, and they worked on things like voice, and they worked on things like the type, well, what are people going to ask this thing, and what's a good answer, and the entire thing was done through, I mean, you know, paper clips and gum, and, you know, kind of hacked together. Initially, it was just a Google form and Twilio. Is the site up? Yeah, so you can read the whole case study on Ask Alexis. I couldn't remember if we took it down or not, but the whole case study's up there on askalexis.io, and we were kind of learning as we went along what we had to automate. I think the basic MVP, once we got the thing running, was based on Twilio, which kind of allows you to use telephony as an API for pretty much anything. But everything was being handled behind the scenes by the 3-person team. When something happened, it's not clear what happened, but somebody put it on Hacker News, and then it ended up on Product Hunt, and we ended up with 1,000 signups overnight on this thing, which was a pleasant but scary surprise. And so they ended up hiring a bunch of people off of Craigslist, kind of temps, to come in and answer questions, because we didn't have any code. There was no code to answer this thing. And so that, for us, was a really interesting experiment. And then, you know, you get to this point where we're a services company, and everybody's got the dream, the Basecamp, the 37 Signals dream, right? Where you're a consulting company and you find a product, and then you get to be a product company and forget about the consulting part, right? And you kind of hit that point where we're like, what are we going to do with this thing? Are you guys, did anybody want to take it and spin it out? And we ended up shutting it down because it just wasn't a priority for us. But I think that was perhaps the most exciting experiment that we ran, certainly with some of the most interesting results, and it really taught us a lot about how to scale these types of things very, very quickly, because we just kind of ended up with 1,000 signups overnight. So some good stories on askalexis.io has the full story there. All right.
I'm not a UX designer.
Okay. Who let you in? Yeah, exactly. That's what I was at. Who let her in? Did you use the secret handshake?
Yeah.
Okay.
I work for a company called Us2. We work with a lot of big clients.
I'll be in your office next week in New York.
Yeah.
Yep. You're also a case study in Lean UX, the 2nd edition. Yep. I know. Yeah. I like you guys.
I had nothing to go. 2 minutes.
I got 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, crap. Well, let me give her a book really quick.
She's in the book.
She's not in that book.
Okay, so I'm wondering if you come across the problem very often of a client or a big company that thinks they already know what the problem space is.
Yes.
With really old research.
Yeah, absolutely. This happens all the time. Right, and the question of how do you know that this is what companies need? It says, well, we know, right? We've been in this business for 30 years or 50 years or 150 years, and we know what customers want. And I think that pushing back on those folks, and I'm working quickly to answer this. I know we're tight on time.
Give me one more question.
Okay, terrific. It's good I got one more book. The idea is how do you know? And generally, if the research is old, we will push back pretty. At least when I was in an agency, we pushed back pretty hard and said, look, you've got to give us a percentage of the budget to validate the problem space, right? Especially if it was old. Like I remember we worked once with a media company. This was back in 2012, and they said I said we should talk about your users, your personas, and they said, oh, we've got personas. We did them 5 years ago. Right, and then somebody went and got the PowerPoint deck printed out, and then they blew the dust off of it, right? And they're like, look, we got Alex the Adventurer. Right, and which was great for a media company, but that was 2007, right? That was the year before the iPhone. That was the year the iPhone came out, right? Media consumption patterns have changed dramatically, right? And so we pushed back and said, look, there's been a significant change in the way that customers consume what you produce. It's been 5 years. We've got to do this again. It's not a real problem. We don't know that there's a real problem to solve here. And so I think that if you can, and it's not like I'm saying, give me 6 months to go figure this out. Give me a week, right? Give me 10 or 15 of your customers. Give me a sense of what you're trying to solve, and we'll come back with you with real findings about, essentially do a design sprint to some extent to prove out that the space is actually still legitimate. And I think you guys do that particularly well, actually, at us2, to kind of ferret that out with your customers. Okay, last question. Joe's going to pick, so I don't have to pick. All right. Excellent. Last question. Last book. There it is. Yeah. Okay.
So I have a question around you talk about product, tech, and design.
Yeah.
So I work in the space of content and this interaction design with content. So one of the big questions that always comes up is where does content fit into that ecosystem? Because often that's something that holds projects up, or that's the last thing that you think about. So it's one of those things, I guess, where do you see the content fits in, and how you can scale that in a lean environment, and where that fits in?
Yeah, so I think that the content fits in the same way. Like I use design sort of as the umbrella term for all of the non-product or tech disciplines that participate. But I think content, if it's the core component of what you're producing, then it needs to be a part of the team on a full-time basis. And I think that the way that you can leverage content or content designers or content strategists in lean environments is to make sure that those people give the team a clear sense of what the content building blocks are for the kinds of products that we make, right? So if assuming you've got a standard set of content building blocks, like we have articles and we have this type of feature and this type of whatever the various permutations of the content that take place in your system. I assume there's some kind of a standardized set, maybe not. And then in giving the team those assets allows them to start to create prototypes and experiments much more rapidly that say, okay, we're going to build sort of a variation on our article presentation, right? This is what it's going to look like. And typically in an article presentation, we've got a headline, we've got a lead, we've got a photo, we've got 4 paragraphs of text, and then some additional links, right? That at least gives the team the opportunity to start to build realistic or lifelike experiments that prove out the value of the experience, prove out the value of the workflow while you're actually generating and creating the real content. But I firmly believe that if that's the core, value proposition of the product or the system, you need to be a full-time member of the team and participating as much as possible.
So would you put that in as a fourth team? So there's product, design, and tech, and
product tech and product design, tech, and content. Yes, absolutely. Cool. Hey, my email address is on the screen, so if you didn't get your question asked, just email me. I'd love to hear from you. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.